Today I'll be comparing filming in 24, 30, and 60 frames per second. Now I have to do this in 3 separate videos because you can't put multiple frame rates in the same video. So this particular video was shot in 24 frames per second, and I'm going to link the other 2 down below in the description box, so be sure to check those out. So like I said before, if you create a video in a 24 frames per second timeline, no matter what frame per second you shot with in the camera, if you place that footage on the 24 frames per second timeline, the video will be in 24 frames per second. So there's no way that I can fully show the differences between 24, 30, and 60 within the same video, because it's going to be whatever frame rate I shot that video in. If I shot it in 24, the 60 clip won't look like 60. So at the end of each one of these videos, I'm going to show additional footage of what these frame rates look like. So be sure to stay tuned to the end of the video. Quick lesson on what frame rate is. Video is just photos shown fast enough to where it looks like it's in motion. So right now you're looking at 24 frames or 24 pictures shown to you every second. And that's being played fast enough to where it looks like motion. So why 24 frames a second? Well, we have to go way back to when they first started filming things with cameras. They found out that if they showed pictures between 10 and 16 frames per second, that it was moving fast enough to where it started to look like a motion picture. Now, being that this is the early film days, the cameras had to be cranked by hand. So imagine having to crank your camera at a specific frame rate to record a video. So if you wanted to film at 16 frames a second, you would have to crank the camera at a constant 16 frames a second. If you slow down any or you speed up any, you're altering the way the film looks. So a lot of the films from that time period had a lot of fluctuation in the frame rates because someone had to literally crank the camera. Now, Thomas Edison played a big part in a lot of the inventions that came out during this time period when it came to filmmaking. And he figured that if a film was played at 46 frames per second, that it would look fluid to the audience, and that anything slower, the audience would get tired of watching it and it would become very uncomfortable for them. Now, the problem with that is if films are generally filmed around 16 frames a second during this time period, switching to 46 frames a second is almost 3 times the amount of film, because if you have 16 frames in the film, it might be this much film, but 46 frames, that's dramatically increasing the amount of film you're using, and they have to pay for the film. So why would I triple the cost that I'm paying for film when the audience is already enjoying the 16 frames a second film? So 46 frames a second didn't really take off because it was just too costly. Now, in the beginning, films didn't have audio. A lot of the times what they would do is film whatever they're filming, and then a live band or something will play along with what's showing on the screen. Now, the way the audio was played, they found out that playing the video at 24 frames a second lined up with the technology in the audio department to fit together and play the audio with the visuals. That's also why when you look at those old silent films, they often look like they're moving very fast, and that's because they were shot at around 16 frames a second and they're being projected at 24 frames a second. So they're being played faster than they were shot. So at this point, pretty much all of the major issues are solved. You can film video, you can record audio, you can play them together, and you're not spending a ton on film. So they just kept making films at that point, and 24 frames per second just became normal. There was no need to change it because all the problems were solved. Now, there are arguments that we should leave 24 frames per second and shoot at higher frame rates like 30 or even higher than that. I covered this more in detail in the 30 frames per second video, so be sure to check that one out. But basically, like Thomas Edison envisioned all those years ago, a higher frame rate should mean a more fluid motion in our brains. So why are we still shooting at 24 frames a second now when we know that a higher frame rate would look more fluid? Well, it's been so long that it pretty much is what it is. We associate Valentine's Day with red. We associate Halloween with orange. We associate Christmas with green and red. And I can technically change the colors to any of those holidays, but it just feels right. It's been that way so long that is what we associate those things with. We associate smells with certain things, tastes with certain things, textures with certain things, sounds with certain things. It's just that it's engraved in us so deeply that 24 frames a second is what looks normal to us because it's been normal to us for so long. I remember when they released Hobbit and they showed Hobbit at 48 frames per second. And that's pretty much around the speed that Thomas Edison envisioned. He had said 46, they shot the movie at 48. That's pretty much what he had in mind for what a movie should look like. Now, when this movie came out and they went to the theaters to see it, some people liked it, but majority of the people hated the way it looked. And it's not that the movie was necessarily bad, it's just that it just looked so weird. It just was so different from all the rest of the movies we normally watch. It was very distracting. The intention of shooting a movie at such a high frame rate is to give it such a fluid motion that it makes you feel like you're a part of the movie. It makes you feel like you're actually there more than something like 24 frames a second. But the thing is, since we associate movies with the 24 frames per second look, instead of getting us deeper into the movie, it takes us away from the movie because we're looking at how weird the movie looks instead of paying attention to what's going on. Now, technology improves all the time. We've made plenty of advances now compared to back then when films first started. And those advancements usually gives a better experience when it comes to the movie theater. The sounds are better, the visuals are better, the special effects are better, the things that we can possibly do become better. So over that time, we've gradually grown into getting a more refined movie experience. But when you go and switch a fundamental aspect like the frame rate, instead of refining the movie, it changed the movie to the point to where we don't recognize it as a movie anymore. It's like, okay, this is very different. And if you want to see what I'm talking about, go watch the 60 frames per second video. It is dramatically different from this one because there's a big difference between 60 frames and 24 frames. So if you really want to get a good look at what I'm talking about, go check out that video. Now, if you remember what I said earlier about the video being in whatever frame rate you set it in, like this video is in 24 frames a second. So no matter what clip I add to this video, no matter what I shot it in on the camera, this video is in 24 frames a second. And you don't want to shoot in 24 frames a second for every situation because, for example, if you want to shoot in slow motion, to shoot in slow motion, you have to shoot at a frame rate that's higher than 24, even if you plan on the final video being 24 frames a second. So if I shot a clip in 60 frames a second and I place that clip into this 24 frames a second timeline, what's going to happen is 36 frames out of that video is going to get deleted. It's just going to toss them to the side because those are 36 extra frames that we don't really need. Or what I can do is, since I have 36 extra frames, I can stretch that video out and still have enough frames to get to 24. So I can stretch that video out 2.5 times in that 24 frame per second timeline because I have 36 extra frames. So instead of putting all 60 of those frames in every second, I can stretch it out 2.5 times and I'll still have at least 24 frames a second in each second. If you shot at 120 frames a second, I can stretch that out 5 times. So I can make that clip 5 times longer than it actually is because I have so many extra frames that I can space them out over a longer period of time. That's basically how you get slow motion. So just because you want your project to be in 24 frames a second, that doesn't mean that everything you shoot has to be in 24 frames a second. You have to shoot for what you plan on doing with the footage. If you're not slowing it down, sure, shoot 24 frames a second. And there are times where you might want to shoot in less than 24 frames a second, but I might get into that in a whole nother video. So 24 frames a second has been king of the cinema world, and I don't see that changing anytime in the near future. So now that you know all about 24 frames a second, let's show some footage. I'm pretty sure you all have seen 24 frames a second footage before, so let's roll the tape. So that's 24 frames a second. Make sure you check out the 30 frames a second and the 60 frames a second video down at the links below. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Make sure to like this video, subscribe, follow me on Instagram, and I will see you guys in the next video.